Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. I want to share a little story today about just something that happened earlier in the summer, actually in the springtime. For those who weren't living under a rock for the last year, we went through the coronavirus pandemic, and there were a lot of, it affected everybody. It affected everybody in different ways. It affected people in ways that they didn't contemplate. And I think everybody suffered. But one of the things that did happen was there were a lot of people, a lot of young college students who were looking forward to internships over the summer. There were a lot of college students who had jobs lined up and those jobs fell through. But there were also kids in the summer that the internships didn't go through. And obviously there are people who lost their lives. There are people who lost their businesses. There are people who suffered great financial hardship. And I'm not trying to belittle any of that, but just to share the story that kids were not getting the internships that they normally get. And generally, students will get an internship, a relevant internship between their junior and their senior year. My son, who goes to Ohio Wesleyan University, was a sophomore last year, knew that he probably wouldn't get an internship, one of the main internships leading between his junior and senior year, but was still hopeful of getting an internship, something that someone might be taking on somebody who was a sophomore. My son's a finance major, does very well in school. I won't brag too much on him, but he does well enough in school, and certainly had a reasonable expectation with his experiences and his grades and the groups and clubs he's associated with that he might find an internship. Well, when the whole coronavirus pandemic came down, he realized quickly, as many people did, that probably wasn't going to happen. He wasn't going to get an internship. There wouldn't be internships. So what he did was he pivoted, decided he was going to try and do something else to he could have sat home and done nothing, but he wanted to make money. He's like his dad. He's an entrepreneur. So what he did was we have a power washer. I have a power washer that I use on occasion. He saw it. He power washed our deck, and he said, "Hey, this is kind of fun. It would be neat for me to have a gig this summer doing power washing." And he got postcards made up, and he put postcards throughout the neighborhood, and put an ad on Craigslist, and put an ad on the various neighborhood groups in Facebook. Went and got himself insurance, created an LLC, had his brother, who is an IT guy working down in Miami, Florida, create a website for him. So he was really kind of thinking the whole thing through. One of the things he did, which brings it back to the Networking RX podcast, is that he reached out to people I know. There's the AmSpirit Business Connections website. He has access to my database. Certainly, I'm happy to share with him. But he reached out to people that I know, and I'll pick on one in particular. One in particular was a guy by the name of Hank Zaborniak. Hank has a painting franchise. He's with 5 Star Painting of Pickerington, and he reached out to Hank, and his message was simple. His message was, "Hank, you don't know me, but you know my dad. My dad's Frank Agin." And then Chase went on to explain, Chase is my son, Chase went on to explain his situation. "Hey, listen, here's my situation. I was, hopefully getting an internship. That wasn't going to work out, so I've got this power washer, and if you make a long story shorter, or a longer email shorter, if you know of anybody who needs any power washing, could you please keep me in mind?" Well, Hank immediately responded and said, hey, let's have a phone call. Let's talk. We paint about 30, 40 houses a summer. My guys don't like to power wash, and it's hard to get them to do it. So, you know what? I could hire you to do it. And you could, I won't get into the financial terms. It's not neither here nor there. But he was essentially setting Chase up with not his whole summer, but certainly, a nice bit of work. To be able to potentially power wash 30, 40 houses before they were painted is, it's nothing to sneeze at. And then in addition, Hank was certainly a sounding board for him to. My son bid on some other jobs, and my son felt he could reach out to Hank and just say, hey, what do you think about this? How should I approach this job? So on and so forth. So I had a conversation with my son, and I asked him, I said, what do you think would have happened if just anybody had reached out to Hank? And I used as an example one of his friends, and just kind of a cold, Hank, you don't know me, but hey, would you send business my way? And my son says, well, he probably wouldn't have gotten the time of day. And so I went on to explain to my son the concept of borrowed trust. And it's a perfect example of borrowed trust. Hank doesn't know my son, never met my son, but Hank knows me. And Hank arguably, hopefully, trusts me. And what Chase did was Chase went in and he said, you don't know me, but you know my father. I'm borrowing some of his trust until I can earn my own trust. And Hank gave him the benefit of the doubt based on his interaction with me over time. Borrowed trust is a concept that I had picked up from Bill Cates. Bill Cates is the author. He's a professional speaker. He's a consultant to all sorts of big companies out there. American Express, Merrill Lynch, Anderson Windows, Mass Mutual Financial Group, Mutual of Omaha. But he's also written a couple of books, Get More Referrals Now, and another book called Radical Relevance. And in those books, well, he was on my podcast a couple of times as well. And through our discussions, he brought up the whole notion of borrowed trust. And I knew it was there. You sense it's there, but I never really kind of put a name to it. I never really kind of thought it was a thing, but it is a thing. Borrowing somebody's trust, relying on somebody's trust until you can establish your own trust is really a powerful concept, because if one of my sons had reached out to Hank, or one of my son's friends had reached out to Hank, or if a stranger had reached out to Hank and said, hey, I want to power wash for you, or can you send me your business, it probably wouldn't have gone very far. And if it went somewhere, it would have probably been a little more standoffish, because whoever that person is, that cold call to Hank, didn't have the trust that they were borrowing. So the important point of this whole podcast episode, and it's a short point, is as you move through your personal and professional lives, look to the people who can borrow trust from you, or look to the people you can borrow trust from too. But as you're trying to advance yourself and you want to meet somebody, figure out who they know that you already have trust with, and ask for an introduction, because that borrowed trust will serve to help you, assuming there's a trusting relationship between the person you're going to and the person you want to be connected with. And that's certainly an important point. A lot of times we're connected to people on LinkedIn, or we might know people, but we don't necessarily have enough of a relationship to have that trust. But if you know of a situation where person A, who you want to work through, knows person B and has enough trust, and you have trust with person A, you should feel comfortable. You should take it upon yourself to reach out to person A and say, listen, I would really like to meet person B. Could you help me with that introduction? And chances are, if you've done the right things all along, that's going to be an easy connection to make. So think about borrowed trust. Also think who you can lend borrowed trust to. If you're seeing somebody out there looking to get into the business world, starting their own business, they've got a business, they want clients, or they're looking to get a job, how you might be able to lend trust to them. Think about that as well. It's certainly a powerful thing that people can help you with, and you can help others with. So before we wrap up, I just want to remind people we are looking for franchisees for AmSpirit Business Connections. This is a unique franchise opportunity in that it's geared to be added on to what somebody is already doing. All of our franchisees do something else. For a few hours in the morning, a couple of mornings a week, they're working with AmSpirit Business Connections groups. The rest of the time, they are attorneys, accountants, financial advisors, business consultants, coaches of various kinds. If you're interested, send me an email. We'll leave one in the show notes, my email in the show notes. In addition, we will leave it one at the end of this podcast.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connections. All rights reserved.